Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel once again. Today we have another case as you saw in the title, and it is Shannon Matthews. This story is set in the UK in 2008. On the side you have my social networks in case you want to go see them. I have nothing more to add, so let's start with this case because it is quite long. On the day of the events, Rick was working at the Morrison's supermarket, while Karen, Shannon's mother and who stayed at home, was doing nothing. She rarely cooked, and all the meals ended up being frozen. Even the refrigerator was not full. She spent her days watching television, in short. Despite the poor quality of life that Shannon had, which I will explain in depth later, she did not seem to have problems. That is, she did not look like a girl with any kind of anger problem. She was quite calm, and you could even say she was shy. But as I said, that was seen on the outside. She really looked very calm. On the morning of February 19th then, Shannon sat next to one of her best friends, named Megan. Megan noticed her a bit strange that morning, since normally Shannon was a person who, although somewhat shy with the rest of the world, with her, she always showed herself happy. They talked a lot, so it was strange this morning since she was now quite quiet. Even stranger was that day they had swimming, and she was not normally very happy about that. She loved this activity. But that day, the truth is that she was very calm according to her best friend. It was only during the afternoon when they were already at the swimming club that she became happy again. She began to express herself as she normally did. She laughed everything normal. The only point to highlight is that during the previous weeks, she was telling her friends that maybe it would be good to run away. The thing is, for the rest of the kids, this was nothing more than a joke, a game, something imaginary. However, for Shannon, it perhaps meant something more. The last people to see Shannon that day were Megan, her best friend who accompanied her in the afternoon, and a teacher who was waiting for the bus they were returning on from swimming. Neither of these two people saw exactly which way Shannon went that day. This was at 3:10 p.m. on February 19th, 2008. If they arrived at 3 for swimming, it would mean that by 4 she would already be at home. However, Shannon didn't return. She wasn't there at 4, and Karen, her mother, began to worry. Karen then went to knock on one of the neighbors' door, and he also said that he hadn't seen Shannon, so she deduced that maybe she was just running late. There were many houses of other friends along the way, from school to home, so she thought, well, maybe she's at a friend's house, so she went to do some shopping, thinking that maybe when she returned, Shannon would already be home. However, this did not happen. Karen returns home at 7 p.m. and doesn't see her daughter. It's only at this moment that she calls the police. So, the police officers knocked on the door of the Matthews house at 7:15 p.m., 15 minutes after the call. Craig and the other kids answered the door while Karen continued to search the neighborhood for her daughter. When the officers entered the house, they noticed a bunch of slightly unusual things, like the fact that it was absolutely filthy. There were also cigarette butts, and the smell of cigarettes was horrible, as they described. There was dirty laundry strewn all over the house as if it had never been cleaned. It was really unusual to have so many children under that kind of care. Shortly after, Karen returned to the house and was visibly upset. The police asked her a couple of questions and she answered absolutely everything as best she could. They tried to ask her why Shannon would run away from home, because that's what they were thinking at the time, and Karen replied that one of her brothers had gotten a new computer and that she was jealous, so maybe that's why. Karen kept repeating over and over that her daughter was somewhere, she was out there alive somewhere. The officers asked if they could search the house, and Craig automatically became defensive, answering what were they trying to accuse him of. However, the police replied that this was just a routine process. That is, it didn't mean anything bad, but maybe by checking the house they could find something that would indicate Shannon's whereabouts. Don't see this behavior anyway as too suspicious, as really most of the time parents in these kinds of conditions become defensive, let's say. A daughter has just disappeared, so it's normal to think that the police should be trying to find other things instead of accusing the parents, which was not being done this time. The other thing they thought was that maybe Shannon hadn't run away anywhere but had rather gone to visit her father, whom she hadn't seen for quite some time. They visited Shannon's father Leon's house but didn't find her there. He was extremely distressed as his daughter had vanished. Obviously, he started looking for her from minute one. He helped the police and neighbors try to find Shannon. So a search team was sent along with the neighbors to try and see if she was still in the neighborhood. The entire community went out to look for the girl, but they didn't find her. They didn't find any traces of her. The clothes she wore that day were also missing. She was going swimming that day, so she brought a bag with clothes and a towel. None of these things were found. The next morning, Shannon's uncle, Neil, was already stating this. We searched everywhere, driving around the entire area until 4 a.m. We looked in the neighbors' gardens and checked all the places she would normally visit. We are very worried. We are in limbo now and we don't know what to do. It's completely out of place and unexpected for her to just leave. She's a quiet and shy girl. She's not the type of girl who would run away if she had any problem. This is all a mystery. It's then, this morning when they can't find her anywhere, that they consider this could have been a kidnapping. So the main investigation team and the homicide investigation team were called. These officers continued the search and went to Craig and Karen's house to look for some new clues, take some things for deoxyribonucleic acid testing to have it ready, and they took some things like this family's computers. All available police departments helped in the search, asking house by house if they had seen Shannon trying to find any object of importance. Julie Bushby was one of the people who led this search, along with all the concerned residents trying to find her. Now that I have given you all this information about how this happened, we can talk about Sharon's past, her childhood, and the relationship she had with Karen, her mother. Sharon Matthews' mother, Karen Matthews, had grown up in Dewsbury. Karen left school at 16 and had her first baby at 17. Then she met Shannon's father, Leon. By that time, she already had her first child. She became pregnant a few months after meeting Leon, and they had a child together. Due to the demands of taking care of the children, the relationship between them became a bit tense. Despite this, at 23 years old, Karen had another daughter. The third time she became pregnant. Her name was Shannon, born on September 9th, 1998. Shannon was taken to Karen's parents, June and Gordon, straight from the hospital. They had seen Karen's previous behavior and knew she wouldn't want to take care of a third girl. So they stayed with Shannon for the first few months of her life. Unfortunately, at some point, she had to go back to her home and they had to send her to Karen and Leon. But as they had predicted, Karen didn't want to raise her. In fact, she didn't even buy diapers. She used what was at hand, curtains, fabric. She really didn't take very good care of her daughter. And the money that was supposed to be used for her upkeep, she spent on cigarettes and beers. Because of all these things, at 2 years old, Shannon saw her father and brother leave the house while she stayed with Karen at home. To all this, the reason why Shannon didn't go with Leon was because Karen basically told Leon to only leave with his son. She demanded that. By the time they were living in Moorside, which is where the events take place, Karen already had 6 children, 5 with different men. Although she moved to this place with only 3, one of them being Shannon. This is when we see Craig enter this story. They had met when Karen was 28 and Craig was 18. After a few weeks of being together, Craig moves in with Karen to this house with the other children. And together they have a daughter, Karen's 7th child. At this point, Karen had 4 children under her care whom she didn't even prioritize. Because of all of this that the family saw happening, they reported to social services the conditions in which these children were living. An investigation was conducted. After some deliberation, social services decided that these children were actually not in any danger. However, one could argue that this decision was not well made, as, for example, social services would give notice before going to the house, which gave Karen time to ask for money to fill the fridge and also clean the house. Another small detail about Shannon's life before the events is that her teachers were very concerned about her, and rightly so. They saw her with a lack of attention that was not at all common in any child. It wasn't simply that she couldn't concentrate in class, but that she took a lot of time to even pay attention or write. She couldn't concentrate enough to do something so basic. And besides, as an additional point, Shannon would arrive at school completely dirty as if she hadn't bathed for weeks. Covered in dust, covered in dirt, and on top of that also wearing clothes that clearly hadn't been cleaned in a long time. Obviously, they also reported it to social services, but again, nothing was done. And unfortunately, as the final piece of Shannon's past, Karen ended up fighting with Leon simply over money. So, Shannon could no longer visit her father. She hadn't seen him in a very long time, and they were both quite sad about it. She was happy visiting him, she laughed a lot with her brother, she had a great time, and what she really wanted at that moment was to stay with her father. However, Karen didn't let them. Now that you have all the context about the family, Shannon's past and everything that happened to her, let's continue with the search. Almost immediately, the Sun newspaper offered a reward of £20,000 for any information leading to Shannon's safe return. They also added an additional £5,000 from a donation. And almost immediately after this, it was announced through this newspaper that the reward would be £50,000. 24 hours after Shannon's disappearance, Karen reached out to the media. During these interviews, she usually looked very sad, but hopeful. Karen's words every time she was interviewed were hopeful. She always said that her daughter must be somewhere, that she was not dead but simply someone had her. So the press stayed with her around her house. However, 7 days after Shannon's disappearance, she was still nowhere to be found. They had spent an entire week looking for clues and nothing turned up. Remember, this was happening during the investigation of Marilyn McCann. If you didn't see that case, I have it in a playlist here above in the eye that's on screen. You can go see it. Anyway, all you need to know about this case is that it's about a missing girl, and the police were accused of being quite negligent, not doing their job well, and having acted quite slowly. Therefore, in this case, the police were keen to always be quick, acting quite efficiently, as there was all that pressure on them. 13 days after the disappearance, which is almost 2 weeks, Shannon appeared at a press conference organized by the police and posed for photos with a shirt that said, "Help find Shannon," with one of her teddy bears. By this time, she appeared more calm. It was no longer a frantic plea for help, but all the emotion had left her. However, she kept repeating the same thing, that someone must have her daughter. I quote, "I think it's someone out there who knows Shannon. They probably know me as well. And I just want her to be safe. It makes me feel like I can't trust the people who are really close to me. I just can't trust them." She was kidnapped, that's all I can say. Karen told the press that the last tea hour, "Mom, I love you." For the 6 o'clock tea time, "Mom, I love you." By the 6th of March, the West Yorkshire Police had questioned 1,500 motorists and searched over 3,000 houses. Over 250 officers and 60 detectives had participated in the investigation. Half of the recovery dogs in the UK were used to search in over 500 homes, lining the route from Shannon to the school. They found nothing. The sex offenders register was also examined, and several closed-circuit television tapes were reviewed, which would be the security cameras of the place. Several computer disks were also examined. So the search for Shannon became one of the biggest and most important in 30 years. But nothing happened. They couldn't find her. As the media interviews progressed, Karen and Craig were faced with increasingly difficult questions. At one point, there were even rumors that they had been violent with Shannon, especially Craig. She was asked if at any point this had been true, and that was the reason why Shannon wanted to leave, but Karen defended him, saying it was impossible that Craig had been violent with their daughter. The police during the investigation were really quite focused on the entire family tree. At one stage, they had a family tree so large that it reached 350 names, so they were visiting them one by one and soon had a list of possible suspects or people with significant information. As part of the investigation, Karen and Craig, along with Shannon's siblings, were part of the investigation. With this, the officers were able to assemble a complete set of Shannon's fingerprints and her deoxyribonucleic acid profile. If a discarded piece of clothing or even a body was found, the officers could directly compare this with Shannon's deoxyribonucleic acid and automatically know if these things belong to her or not. Let's also remember that they started from the fact that Karen had a lot of children with different people, which opened up quite a few different connections. The whole case takes a complete turn several days after the disappearance. On Thursday, March 13, 2008, several people in the community had organized a party to raise funds to search for Shannon. And while that was happening, the police were investigating new information that had come to them. It turns out that one of Craig's relatives had spoken with his uncle, Michael Donovan. This individual will be crucial for the rest of the case. The relative informed this uncle of Craig that the police were looking for his testimony. The strange thing was that nobody in the family, including Craig and Karen, had mentioned it before. They didn't mention him as part of the family tree, so the police didn't consider him because of them. So this relative asked Donovan during the call if he would speak to the police to be ruled out, and he refused. So on March 14th, the officers decided to go visit Donovan. This was a pretty strange situation. As I said, they had never mentioned him as part of the family. The truth is as if they hadn't taken him into account, but there was also the fact that Karen used to forget the names of her own children. So it was a situation, as I said, strange. So on the morning of February 14th, they decided that 2 detectives would go to Donovan's apartment to ask him some questions. The people in charge of this would be Nick Townsend and Paul Kettlewell. They had spent the last 3 weeks investigating, talking to the family, and searching for new details. So they were quite linked to the investigation. Donovan lived in Lydgate Gardens, a large 2-story estate in Bartley Carr. So these 2 officers arrived at this place, went up the stairs, and knocked on the door. However, absolutely no one responded. So before they forcibly entered for any reason, they tried to communicate with the neighbors. One of them told them that the car, which he always traveled everywhere with, he never left without his car, was in his parking spot. So they kept asking all these neighbors, and one of them ended up telling them that she had been hearing noises upstairs, and after a few questions, she also mentioned that she had heard what sounded like a child dragging his feet. It should be noted that Donovan's children were no longer there and that he actually had a girlfriend, so the neighbors simply thought it could be one of her children. She didn't give it much thought. However, for the 2 officers who had this whole mystery in their hands, all of this really seemed strange to them, so they called for help. After a while then, the team that would help them arrived. They gathered on the stairs and discussed what they would do. They ended up breaking down Michael Donovan's door. They entered his apartment and there was no one there. The floor was completely silent, which was obviously impossible as the neighbor had said she was hearing noises. That's when one of the officers tries to open a bedroom door and realizes it's locked. They break down that door too. There was still a smell of cigarette smoke, and the bed sheets in the bedroom were still warm, so someone had been using them recently. It's at that moment when they enter, check that the sheets are warm, that the scream of a girl surprises him. They heard her say, "Stop, you're scaring me." The sound was a bit muffled and came from under the bed. They checked this bed and discovered that it had some solid sides. Between 2 officers, they tried to lift this, and with much effort, once everything had been discovered, a girl came out of a drawer under the bed hole. Trying to stand up a bit confused, one of the officers helped her and took her outside. They also tried to look for Donovan. They asked her where he was, and she replied that there, from where she had come out, under the bed, he was in fetal position inside this place, inside this drawer, hoping not to be found. He was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Inside the bed, he had been found in fetal position, as I said before, along with 600 pounds in cash, a prescription for temazepam, motion sickness medication, and a copy of the Sun newspaper with the headline of the £50,000 reward for Shannon. The neighbors who were gathered below with the recent news, and one of them finally asked if this girl they had rescued was indeed Shannon. At that moment, the police responded affirmatively. The missing girl was finally safe. After leaving her in a quiet place, they checked the apartment again. They found a long cloth hanging from a beam. Donovan would put this cloth around Shannon's waist to prevent her from escaping while moving from the bed to the bathroom. Along with this, also moving from the bed to the bathroom. Along with this, they also found a list of rules that said the following. You should not make any noise or hit your feet. You should not approach the windows. Do not do anything unless I am there. Keep the TV volume low, only up to 8 or less. You can play Super Mario games. You can play some DVDs and you can play music from CDs. The police found 2 bags full of clothes near the door. Along with this and the things he wanted to take, he was about to escape. In fact, he wanted to go and was about to escape. And in fact, a quick review of his history showed that he had tried to kidnap his own daughter a while ago. They believed that his intention then was to take Shannon with him. After this great discovery, obviously Shannon's family found out. Leon was extremely happy. He was crying. He was saying that he was very happy that his daughter was still alive. No one could believe it. Everyone who came to search for Shannon was very happy, grateful for the news. The neighbors who had found out ran to Karen's house and told her what had happened. They told her that Shannon was alive. Even though she had shown emotion at this moment, when the cameras arrived and tried to focus on her face, she hid it. She hid from the cameras, attempting to conceal her current expression. Even so, the reporters saw her. She was not smiling. In fact, she was a bit worried. They even had to tell her to smile because Karen wasn't smiling. Even after the police arrived at the house and confirmed the facts themselves, Karen didn't even ask about her daughter. She didn't ask how she was. Shannon was then at a police station, and Karen had been taken to see her through a glass. That's when they tell Karen and Craig that they wouldn't be able to see her until the investigations were over. As Karen looked at her daughter, after 24 days of being missing, through a glass, she showed no kind of concern. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she did nothing. The only thing she managed to say while looking at her is she has new clothes. She was no longer put on emergency attention by social services and would remain under police protection for 72 hours. Karen and Craig were put in a hotel overnight to rest, as was Michael Donovan. They wanted to know the reason behind kidnapping this girl. So he told them about the plan that Karen had proposed to him. He says that she approached him with this plan, that it was her idea, and that she told him he would have to take care of Shannon for a while. That they would then declare her as missing and that they would take the reward afterwards. When it reached £25,000, Karen called him to tell him that at $50,000, she would give him new instructions. However, when it reached $50,000, Karen did not call him before the police caught him. Donovan also said that he couldn't get out of this, that he couldn't reject it because Karen had threatened him. That if he didn't follow this plan, she would send people to hurt him. Let's get to know a little about the life of Michael Donovan then. Who was this person? He was actually born as Paul Drake. He was the youngest of 9 siblings. He grew up on a farm not too far from where they later found Shannon. Around age 11, he began getting into trouble by shoplifting and setting fires. When he was 16, he was charged with criminal damage and ended up running away from home. By age 19, he had changed his name to Michael Donovan. He found a job as a laborer at an engineering company, and truthfully, he didn't prove to be a very good worker. He had met Karen in November of the previous year. They quickly became very close to the point where it was rumored they had some sort of romance. And that's how it gets to this point when Karen supposedly gives him this plan. In the weeks following the discovery, Shannon was under protection and was asked a few questions per session, trying not to disturb her. After the police protection ended, she ended up staying with a family called Kirkleys. Then on March 17, 2008, Michael Donovan was finally charged with kidnapping, held in custody. And while all this was happening, Karen's friends and family were quite worried. She was not showing any signs of wanting to know what was happening to her daughter. The police had told her that she would not return until the investigations were completed. They didn't know how much time was going to pass, and Karen hadn't been worried in the slightest. She hadn't even shown that she wanted her daughter to return. However, the real reason why Shannon couldn't return to her family was because of Donovan's accusations. Now Karen was in the police's crosshairs. It was then on April 2nd, sometime later, that Craig was arrested. It turns out they had found images of children on his computer. Child pornography. The day after this, Michael Donovan was released on bail. After all these events then, the family was definitely a bit tired of Karen's attitude. They suspected the same as the police, unaware of Michael's story. So Julie Bushby, who was one of the people who led the search, along with a friend named Natalie, decided to do something about it. They spoke with one of the officers in charge of communicating with the family and told her what they were planning, so the three of them agreed. The police picked up Karen in their car and went to pick up the other two girls. After a few moments, they began to question her about certain things. They began to tell her that there were rumors that she had been involved in the kidnapping. And it's there after some questions and after that one in particular that Karen started crying and said, "It's true, everything is true." Karen was then immediately arrested. Donovan and Karen told their own separate stories to the police, but they ended up being quite contradictory. In the end, what could be concluded was that they met at a small local cafe. Karen arrived with her youngest daughter strapped to her stroller, and while they were having a snack, she presented her plan. Initially, she said that Donovan would take care of her older son in what would be an organized kidnapping. When Donovan refused to do this, he explained that he didn't even know her older son. Karen then changed her plan. She decided that Shannon was a much better option and that the reward for helping to locate her would probably be much more. On the other hand, Craig, Shannon's stepfather, pleaded innocent only to later be charged with 11 counts of possession of child pornography. All these images had been found stored on his computer, which, as I said before, the police had confiscated during the investigation. He received a 20-week prison sentence, having already served some time. Michael Donovan and Karen Matthews were tried together in the Leeds Crown Court on November 11, 2008. The trial lasted just over 3 weeks. Neither of them showed any emotion when they were brought to court. The court heard how Shannon said she didn't know anything about what was happening and that she had been deceived that day. She agreed to let Donovan take her home from school with the promise of taking her to a fair. He imprisoned her. To make things worse, we have forensic toxicologist exams. According to them, the tests they had done on Shannon indicated that she had been given temazepam as well as travel sickness medication, that is, nausea, to subdue her while she was held captive. Tests administered to Shannon up to 20 months before her disappearance. This would be the reason why she was so distracted at school, something her teachers and friends noticed. Karen ended up testifying, saying she had nothing to do with it while crying. On the other hand, the prosecutor gave the police 5 different versions of the same story. The police received 5 conflicting accounts of the incident. That's why Karen, at 33 years old, and Donovan, at 40, received 8 years in prison, being declared guilty of kidnapping. Both Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan were released in March 2012 after serving half of their sentence, 4 years. Once Karen was released, she was taken to a women's shelter in the home counties in a private car. She received a makeover and a new identity. On her first outing with the staff, she was recognized immediately, which tells us that at least she won't go out on the street peacefully, as everyone around her knows the story. After everything that happened legally, all I can tell you is what happened with Shannon Matthew afterwards. She was given a new life without the possibility of ever seeing her family again. This included her grandparents, who had been with her for a long time. They had supported her and tried to give her a good life. Let's remember that they took care of her during the first months of her life. They could never see her again. Neither could her friends. She couldn't return to this town to see them. The protection they had put on her was of that style. She had to start a new life without any of the people she had known before. To Gordon's school, the grandfather then declares after several years. Gordon's school, the grandfather then declares after several years, after seeing a photo of her granddaughter. Now, this is my only wish, is that when she is old enough to understand what happened correctly, she will come and knock on the door. But I'm afraid it will be too late and I won't be here to see her. I'll be up there in heaven watching her. And well, that was the whole case for today. It's not really tragic, so to speak, since the girl was ultimately unharmed and was able to rebuild her life away from people who were obviously harmful. But it was a mystery that took weeks of investigation and concern from people who knew and cared for her. The only thing I really regret is the fact that, well, the people who cared about her could never see her again. And well, that was the whole video for today. I hope you liked it. You know that on the side are my Patreons who support me from the page. Below is the link for those who don't know what I'm talking about. And well, without further ado, here is a new video. Here is a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.